Uriel is one hell of a frame. Hello Tenno, let's talk shop, shall we? Since the release of the old piece, I've been doing some pretty outlandish testing alongside the Great Bardini and Zerenium. So now, I'm compiling everything I've learned thus far, as I don't think there's much more to reveal about the hidden mechanics of his toolkit at this point. You can get Uriel for yourself by running the new Descendia mission. Even on base difficulty, you shouldn't have too much trouble farming out all of his parts in 3 to 4 runs, as you can buy them from Roth in the Sanctum Anatomica's new wing, the La Cathedral, for 20 Mafix each, and 75 for the blueprint. He's honestly probably one of the easiest frames to farm at this point, in my honest opinion. With that out of the way, let's examine what we're actually working with regards to his toolkit. Starting with Uriel's 3 passive effects, which are ingrained into his first 3 abilities. As you level him up and unlock these abilities, he will also unlock 3 demonic companions to fight alongside him. Caternac is tied to Infernalis, Galphagor is tied to Remedium, and Vithalis is tied to Dominium. Each demon has a passive effect that triggers independently of its respective ability, but each ability has a secondary effect that also scales up its respective demon's capabilities based on power, strength, and duration. If an ability is subsumed over, then the demon loses out on the additional scaling to its respective ability. So when picking subsumes, keep that in mind. Caternac will attack a single target within 6 meters of itself with a chain. This chain will then seek out up to 4 additional targets up to 15 meters from the original target. This additional chaining effect won't trigger unless at least 2 additional targets are within range. Damage dealt to one ensnared target is inflicted equally to the rest. Caternac will hover over the original target and can still be harmed by enemy weapon fire. If the player moves too far away, Caternac will unleash all ensnared targets and teleport to the player. This effect will last for 10 seconds and will not reactivate unless the ensnared targets are killed. Caternac cannot chain enemies with Overguard. And additionally, ensnared enemies are slowed by 50%, and so long as Infernalis hasn't been subsumed over, this can scale up to 95% with power strength. Galphagor latches onto a single target within 12 meters of the player once every 4 seconds, forcing a stagger animation and dealing 4 ticks of damage per second for 10 seconds. If killed either by the player or Galphagor, an 8-meter wide AoE effect is spawned at the target's location. The AoE effect has a 100% status chance of inflicting a burn proc once every 0.5 seconds. Due to limitations with Galphagor only attacking once every 4 seconds, with a possible short cooldown of undetermined length, it's only possible to have 2, maybe 3 of these AoE effects active at any given time. While latched onto a target, Galphagor cannot be hurt by enemy weapon fire. When the target dies, it will produce 1 energy orb and 3 health orbs. So long as Remedium has not been subsumed over, for every 40 strength, you will generate an additional health orb, and for every 100 strength, you will generate an additional energy orb, Vithalis. Once every 12 seconds, this demonic companion will consume 1 corpse to create 1 of up to 3 floating runes. It would appear that a rune will last indefinitely or until a new rune has been created to replace the oldest one. Collecting a rune gives a 30% fire rate increase to primary and secondary weapons, as well as an extra 30% heat damage for 10 seconds, so long as Dominium has not been subsumed over. This can be further increased. This extra heat damage can also be passed on to Incarnate Evolutions, though this may be a bug. Wow, that was a lot, but it's only scratching the surface of the finer details I have to share. So next up is Uriel's actual abilities. Infernalis. Expend 25 energy for Uriel to set himself ablaze for 35 seconds, scaling with ability duration, with a 100% status chance of inflicting a burn proc on enemies within 2 meters, scaling with ability range. Damage scales with ability strength. While active, perform a dodge roll to then take flight. Flight speed scales with parkour velocity. This is an amazing piece of movement tech, as it doesn't consume energy while in flight. It can break containers, and your demons can still trigger their passive effects. This does, however, activate as a dodge roll and thus will trigger Rolling Guard and Arcane Circumvent, but only upon the initial activation to take flight. Once in flight, they will not trigger again. But you also cannot use your abilities, reload, or fire your weapon. Remedium. Expend 50 energy for 1 second of invulnerability and a status cleanse, after which Uriel and his demons recover 50% of their total health and shields, scaling with power strength. If a demon is dead, this will also revive them to full health. Any amount of excess healing overflows into Overshield. This is where things start to get a little complicated though. There are, to my knowledge, only 4 ways to heal your demons: Remedium, Blood Altar, Vathrin's Protective Sling, and the Sancti Magistar's Heavy Attack. Nothing else I've tested has worked thus far. If a demon dies, they have a 1-minute cooldown before they will automatically revive, and nothing seems to be able to reduce that cooldown. That makes this ability an automatic no-go for a Subsume option in my opinion because of how his third ability functions. Dominium. Expend 75 energy to reduce the total health of each living demon by 10% to cast 3 projectiles that will travel in a straight line until they make contact with an enemy, at which point each projectile splits into multiple parts to actively seek out new targets. Each projectile has a 100% status chance of inflicting a burn proc, as well as a 50% damage vulnerability. Casting the ability cannot kill a demon, but the ability also cannot be cast unless at least 1 demon is alive. The projectiles do not check for line of sight, meaning the ability can be cast into a solid object and they will still travel through it if capable of hitting a valid target on the other side. They also travel with the landscape, meaning they're capable of moving up or down as needed in order to hit said target. Once moving, they can also crisscross with each other to seek out a different target than what may be expected by the player. This seems to be determined by the landscape itself that they are traveling over. Once the initial 3 projectiles have made contact with a target, the player can then move to face a different group of enemies, causing the now split projectiles to travel in that direction. And finally, Brimstone. Expend 75 energy for 1 second of invulnerability, as well as setting everything within 15 meters, scaling with range, on fire for 10 seconds, scaling with duration. Damage is dealt initially upon cast to all targets within range, with a 100% status chance of inflicting a burn proc, then again once every 0.5 seconds, with each consecutive instance of heat damage increasing by 100% up to a cap of 10 times. There is no damage fall off or line of sight check. However, this ability cannot be cast unless the heat gauge is full. Once enough heat has been built up, you can cast the ability 1 time before needing to refill the gauge again. There are 5 distinct ways of building up the heat gauge that I'm aware of, with each providing a different amount of energy earned. Damaging enemies with your third ability, Dominium, killing the enemies chained together by Kotanak, killing or assisting Galphagor in killing its targeted enemy, collecting runes created by Vithalis, and finally, casting Dominium when all 3 demons are within the critical area of their health, regardless of hitting enemies or not. However, this only provides the energy towards the gauge once the projectiles have traveled their full possible distance. To my knowledge, the amount of energy earned towards the heat gauge does not scale with anything the player can directly control, but meeting multiple conditions at once does seem to provide a much larger amount of energy than may be expected. There may also be other conditions that can contribute, but I've yet to narrow down any further possibilities. points. Uriel's entire toolkit is built in service of his 4th ability, with his 2nd and 3rd ability being requirements for his 4th to function properly. The limitations of his 2 being one of only 4 ways to heal the demon, with no other way of being able to revive them, means we can't subsume over it. His 3rd being the primary catalyst to build up the heat gauge for his 4th means we also can't reasonably subsume over it, which just leaves his 1st ability as default, the only real option for a subsume slot, which is fine. Honestly, I'm enjoying him without a subsume, but I do want to cover all the basics so you know what to expect with him. But now we're left with a question. How exactly do we build Uriel knowing what we know? Uriel, in my opinion, is a weapons platform caster frame who's going to be spamming his 2 and 3, but you'll get the majority of your kills with your weapons as you build up the heat gauge to cast Brimstone. This is the build I've gone with for now, trying to complement and augment what he's already good at. Uriel needs range and strength most of all for his toolkit to function properly. I prioritized range over strength, with ways to build up further strength as the mission progresses, while also building into high duration. We want as much range as we can get because that influences the passive effect of all 3 demons, as well as Infernalis, Dominium, and Brimstone. The more targets we can hit with Dominium speeds up how quickly we can cast Brimstone. Uriel's 2nd ability will status cleanse us and can generate Overshield, which becomes our primary source of survivability, complemented by the set bonus of Augur Reach and Augur Message, with adaptation to round it all out. Keeping in mind, enemies on fire are forced into a flailing animation, so that is another source of survivability. If an enemy is too busy freaking out, they aren't shooting at you. The healing from Remedium also scales 1-to-1 with your power strength. So, at 200 power strength, that's a 100% heal. This allows us to run Combat Discipline and Archon Intensify to boost our power strength even more without the risk of accidentally killing ourselves. Because Galphagor will attack a target once every 4 seconds or so, and thus generate free health and energy orbs, we don't really need Equilibrium, but having at least 1 Violet Archon Shard is still recommended. Otherwise, we need to be a little bit more conservative with spam casting, which could put us at risk of not being able to cast Remedium when we really need it. If all 3 demons are down and we're out of energy, that's a very bad situation to be in. We'd have no way of being able to protect ourselves. Galphagor allows us to somewhat comfortably run Blind Rage to help offset the loss of power strength from overextended. Once everything is in motion, we will have 259 power strength and 220 range. Very few things are going to survive Brimstone, which, with this build, I've been able to cast upwards of 3 times per minute. Not super consistently, but still consistent enough that it feels really powerful. For duration, Prime Continuity and Augur Message felt like a good balancing point to me. It allows the effect of our demons to last longer than we really need, but also because Infernalis is duration based, we can maintain flight for much longer than we might actually need, which is very useful on the larger tile sets of 1999 and the Rebellion. Firewalker. Now that's probably a mod a lot of you have never used unironically, but it does give us the highest parkour velocity of any mod, so if we want the zoomies, we need it. I would also recommend an Amber Archon Shard for more parkour velocity, as well as a 2nd Archon Shard for casting speed. Uriel's casting animations are a little too slow for my liking, with the final part of the build being Arcane Hotshot as a flex option. All of Uriel's damaging abilities have a 100% status chance of inflicting a burn proc. This Arcane thus gives a 300% crit chance to all of our weapons with little to no downtime. In conclusion, Uriel is a very well-rounded frame with some minor subsume limitations such as Roar, Zata's Whisper, and Eclipse being locked to the 3rd slot, thus removing those as possible options because we absolutely need Dominium. And as always, a very special thank you to my Patreon supporters, as well as those who have contributed directly to my well-being this month. It's been a little rough.